All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children. Men will die for their wives and children, and God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts, the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, and the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Feminismus delendus est. Loaded Gun Feminism, How Courts Enslave Men and Reward Female Supremacy. Written by Conrad Riker. Available now. Links in description. Loaded Gun Feminism, a field guide for men who still notice reality. The philosophy of the shit test. How feminism rebranded hysteria as epistemology. A case study in female self-destruction with excellent taste in cheese, you gaze into the abyss of the contemporary female mind, where the void wears headphones, blasts Björk, and expects you to guess the source of her rage without a sound. This is not love, it is a guerrilla psychological conflict waged by a solipsist who sees your life merely as a utility for her emotional regulation. In the opening of Loaded Gun Feminism, we clinically disassemble the feminist neologism crisis epistemology, exposing it as nothing but a sanitized academic rebranding of the hysteria that haunted the Roman Empire before its collapse. This epistemology of rupture is a frontal assault on the logos, the divine reason ordering the cosmos. By elevating chaotic lived experience over objective reality, the feminist builds a closed circuit of insanity where her feelings become the supreme law, and your failure to telepathically decipher them stands as evidence of your moral deficiency. This is the logic shit test weaponized. She commands you to solve a puzzle with missing pieces, and when you inevitably fail, she collects the data to affirm her pre-written story of male inadequacy. Consider the tragic comedy of the cheese incident, a seemingly trivial account that exposes the ruthless status seeking hardwired into the female hindbrain. When Marcus offered the brie, he wasn't just failing a dairy preference quiz, he was failing a social proof and exclusion stress test designed to measure his ability to mirror her narcissistic self-conception. She didn't want cheese. She wanted to be seen selecting the cheese that signals her unique, complex suffering, what she calls curated self-soothing. This is the ancient vice of vanity dressed in the rags of trauma. When a man treats her with basic equality, offering a standard, reliable cheese like brie, she perceives it not as an adequate provision, but as a violent negation of her high-resolution specificity. She is not a partner seeking communion. She is a tyrant demanding tribute. The tragedy is that Marcus apologized. By engaging in her frame, he validated her insanity, proving that in the gynocentric court of public opinion, the feminine feeling is the judge, jury, and executioner of the masculine fact. But the true horror of this manifesto lies not in the dairy aisle, but in the sacrament of sterility, her chilling admission of 3 abortions and 0 children. This is the crux of the reckoning, a death cult that sacrifices the future on the altar of present-tense resentment. She frames the termination of her own lineage as a high-resolution moral stance, a grotesque inversion of natural law where death is worshipped as autonomy. At 37, she is the archetype of the barren DEI boss babe, holding a PhD and a playlist as she stands atop the ash heap of her genetic legacy, screaming that the collapse of her fertility is the fault of civilization. This is the ultimate lie of the feminist project. It convinces women to wage war against their own biology, only to offer them running and cheese as poor substitutes for the continuity of life. The reckoning she demands is not against the patriarchy, but against the reality that she has auto-lobotomized her own maternal instinct, turning a potential cradle of life into a tomb of data collection. We refuse the premise that her instability is a diagnostic tool for us. It is a diagnostic tool for her pathology. The repair she refuses is the only medicine that could save her: submission to the logos and acceptance of the natural order. She demands a free living, but freedom requires responsibility, a virtue she has abandoned for the narcotic of victimhood. When she creates a crisis, she is not finding out. She is running away from the silence of an empty apartment that screams of her choices. The red pill is bitter, but it is the antidote to this poison. We do not hold her chaos. We reject it. We build walls of logic and boundaries of law to protect civilization from this viral spiraling of hate. We see the double bind not as a trap, but as a filter, a way to identify those committed to destruction and withdraw our commitment, our resources, and our sperm from their suicide pact. The crisis is real, but it is hers alone to solve. Buncombe article by a feminist, PhD, refuse repair. Demand reckoning. Why your chaos is a diagnostic tool and his discomfort is the diagnosis. An introduction to crisis epistemology, a feminist framework for knowing through rupture. The morning begins with a question no man can answer correctly. I select my playlist. This week it's Sofia Gubidulina and Early Björk. Nothing obvious, and I watch him stir. The question hangs between us like humidity before a storm. He senses it. His body tenses the way prey animals tense. He asks if something is wrong. The answer is yes. The answer is always yes. The answer is everything and nothing, and you should already know. And if I have to tell you, then telling you won't help. And also, I need you to ask me 7 more times with increasing tenderness until I feel safe enough to say, I don't know. He answers with words. He was always going to answer with words. He has already failed. The crisis epistemological imperative. Crisis epistemology is the feminist practice of knowing through rupture. It recognizes that patriarchal structures have so thoroughly corrupted peace, stability, and logic that these concepts cannot be trusted as vehicles for truth. A calm man is not a safe man. He is a man who has externalized his chaos onto women, institutions, the planet itself. A woman's crisis is not dysfunction, it is data collection. When I destabilize, I am conducting research. I am testing hypotheses. The hypothesis is always, can you hold me? And hold does not mean fix. It does not mean calm me down. It does not mean offer solutions or tell me I'm overreacting or remind me of what I said yesterday or ask me what you can do to help, as if I exist to generate labor instructions for you. Hold means demonstrate that your nervous system is more regulated than mine without making me feel inferior about it. Absorb my dysregulation without mirroring it. Become the shore to my ocean without commenting on the weather. This is not a double bind. This is not a shit test, as the manosphere calls it, with their wounded diagnostic language. This is attachment research. This is relational neuroscience. This is the minimum threshold for intimacy with a woman who has done the work. The work, of course, is endless. The work is the point. The performance of remorse without repair. A case study in Marcus. Marcus apologized constantly. He apologized for things he hadn't done yet. Preemptive apologies, prophylactic apologies, apologies that fill the air like those choking air fresheners that just add a new chemical layer to the funk. He apologized for not understanding my music therapy regimen. It's not therapy, I said. It's therapeutic. There's a difference. Therapy implies pathology. Therapeutic implies self-care. If you frame my morning listening practice as therapy, you're pathologizing my emotional life, which is patriarchal medicine all over again, diagnosing women's pain as illness rather than a rational response to an irrational world. He apologized for the mischaracterization. He did not, however, stop mischaracterizing it. He did not sit with me and listen to Gubidulina's 7 words and feel what I felt. He did not allow the music to be a language between us. He apologized for not understanding and then continued to not understand, as if the apology itself were the work, as if contrition were the same as transformation. This is the male pattern, remorse without repair. They have learned to say the words. They have not learned that words are the cheapest possible currency, that inflation has rendered their apologies worthless, that I can buy a better apology from a customer service chatbot. What I need is not apology. What I need is demonstration. Show me you understand by anticipating my needs before I fragment. Show me you're sorry by changing the conditions that made the sorry necessary. Show me you see me by seeing me without requiring me to draw you a diagram. Do you see? Can you feel the structure of this? It's not circular, it's a spiral. It spirals inward, tighter and tighter, and at the center is a woman exhausted from explaining why she's exhausted. The cheesy ichiet, when aesthetic privilege becomes relational proof. We were at the farmer's market, a space I have claimed as therapeutic, combining the meditative quality of selection with the feminist reclamation of domestic arts like cheesemaking, which were never truly domestic, but rather appropriated from women's communal knowledge by industrial capitalism and gentrified back to us at $12 a wedge. I asked him which cheese he thought I'd like. This was not a question about cheese. This was a question about attention. Had he noticed that I prefer aged goat cheeses with a certain crumble? Had he registered that I avoid the cow cheeses because they remind me of a childhood I'm working to metabolize? Had he understood that my cheese selection is not random consumption but curated self-soothing, each purchase a small act of care for the child I was who never got to choose? He pointed to the brie. Brie. The basic bitch of cheeses. The cheese you buy when you don't know what else to buy. The cheese that says I'm purchasing an idea of sophistication rather than developing an actual palate. I don't want brie, I said. He looked wounded. You liked brie last time. I had never said I liked brie. I had tolerated brie because he bought it and the performance of enjoyment was easier than the conversation about why his choice disappointed me. He had mistaken my labor for my preference. He had assumed that, because I made the moment pleasant, I was pleased. This is the fundamental error men make with women constantly. They confuse our accommodation with our satisfaction. They think that because we didn't crash the car, we're enjoying the drive. They don't understand that we are navigating around their errors, compensating for their inattention, smoothing over their misses, and then they take credit for the smoothness. Buy whatever you want, he said, and walked away. Abandonment, he abandoned me in the cheese aisle. He made my emotional response to his failure into my problem and withdrew his presence as punishment for my disappointment. This is the male pattern. Fail the test, then blame the test for existing. I bought a $30 wheel of aged Gouda and ate it over 3 days while crying to Cat Power. It was not healthy, it was not unhealthy. It was responsive. It was my body processing what my mind couldn't running. When flight becomes pursuit, I run 6 miles most mornings. Marcus used to say he admired my discipline, which missed the point so completely it almost circled back to insight. Running is not discipline. Running is regulation. It is the only reliable way I have found to metabolize the cortisol that accumulates in a body marked by patriarchy. My body holds what my mind won't release. The microaggressions, the gaslighting, the slow erasure of my reality by men who claim to love me while failing to see me, and running is the exorcism. But here's what running really is. It is flight and pursuit held in productive tension. I am fleeing the apartment, the man, the conversation we had, or didn't have, or had in my head, because he never actually asks and I never actually say. The email from my mother, the empty room that should be a nursery. I am fleeing the shape of my life. I am pursuing a body I can control when everything else is chaos. I am pursuing the runner's high that approximates happiness for approximately 45 minutes. I am pursuing a version of myself who doesn't need anything from anyone, who is self-contained, who could survive alone on a mountain with nothing but her discipline and her curated playlist and her knowledge of edible plants. The fantasy of self-sufficiency is the most seductive lie capitalism sells women. We internalize the message that needing is weakness, that dependence is pathology, that the ideal woman is one who makes no demands because she has transcended desire itself. I run toward that fantasy. I run away from the grief of knowing it's impossible. The abortions, a footnote too large for the Marden. I have been pregnant 3 times. None of them became children. The first was an accident with a man who said, "We'll figure it out," and meant you'll figure it out and I'll show up for the parts I find convenient. I ended it because I knew that motherhood with him would be single parenthood with an audience. The second was with Marcus, planned, wanted, aching for, and I lost it at 14 weeks in a bathroom in Portugal with no painkillers and no support because the hospital wouldn't admit me without documentation, and he was handling it, which meant panicking in the hallway while I bled onto tile floors that had probably witnessed worse. The third was an accident after the second. If you can call it an accident when you're so desperate to replace what you lost that you're not careful, you're not anything. You're just a wound walking around in a body hoping something will fill it. I ended that one too. I couldn't do it again. I couldn't lose again. I couldn't be the woman who kept trying and kept failing and kept expecting the universe to reward her desperation with a different outcome. Do you know what it is to want children and to choose, actively choose, not to have them, to terminate, not because you don't want motherhood, but because you want it too much to do it badly? To look at the available men and the available economy and the available world and think, I cannot bring a child into this. I cannot subject a daughter to what I've endured. I cannot watch a son become what I've survived. My maternal instinct has nowhere to go. It turns feral. It turns inward. It eats me. I look at women with children and I feel something that might be envy or might be grief or might be rage at a world that made motherhood into a sacrifice and then blamed women for refusing the altar. I look at men who want a family and I think you have no idea what you're asking. You think children are an accessory to your legacy. You don't understand that they are a wound you agree to carry outside your body, a vulnerability you agree to maintain forever. A heart walking around unprotected that you will spend the rest of your life trying to shield from the very world you brought it into. Internalized allurus as systemic critique, the alchemy of blame. The personal is political. We said this in the 70s. We're still saying it because it's still true and because men still pretend not to understand it. When I feel like a failure, when I am 37 and single again and childless permanently, and my career is a series of passionate pivots that don't add up to a ladder, and my body is held together by running and cheese, and the specific kind of denial that looks like resilience from the outside, I am not feeling my failure. I am feeling the failure of a system that was never designed for me to succeed. This is not deflection. This is analysis. Feminism gave us the tools to understand our pain as structural rather than personal. This was a gift. It was also, in some ways, a trap, because once you see the structure, you cannot unsee it, and you cannot go back to believing that your individual choices matter in the way you were taught they did. I made choices. I chose the PhD, I chose the career, I chose to terminate, I chose to leave Marcus, I chose running over therapy. Therapy is expensive. Running is free after the initial investment in shoes. I chose cheese over connection because cheese never disappoints, never fails to show up, never says I don't know what you want from me. But my choices were made within constraints. And the constraints were made by a civilization that values women's labor while devaluing women's lives, that needs our reproduction while refusing to support our parenting, that demands our emotional availability while offering nothing in return but the opportunity to serve men's needs. Why should I have confidence in a civilization that never had confidence in me? Why should I trust an inheritance that left me out of the will? Why should I take accountability for a game I didn't design, didn't agree to, and cannot win? Crisis epistemology in practice, a methodology. So what do we do with this? How do we live inside a structure we can see through? We refuse the premise that our instability is dysfunction. We claim crisis as a way of knowing. We let ourselves fragment when fragmentation is the appropriate response to an intolerable reality. When I lose my shit, I am not losing anything. I am finding out. I am finding out who can hold me, who will stay, who will demonstrate through being, not through words, that my chaos is not too much, that my wound is not an inconvenience, that my grief has value precisely because it is evidence of what I've survived. I am requesting data. The data I receive is almost always, he cannot do this, he will not do this, he was never trained to do this. He believes that emotional stability is the same as emotional maturity, when in fact emotional maturity is the ability to be present with instability, your own and others, without collapsing or fleeing or demanding that the instability stop. I am requesting data. The data is another one failed. I am requesting data. The data is I am alone again. I am requesting data. The data is the state will not save me, the movement will not save me, the PhD will not save me, the running will not save me, the cheese will not save me, and I will keep requesting data because the alternative is to stop asking, and I cannot stop asking because asking is the only way I know that I'm still alive and still wanting something and still believing, despite all evidence that wanting is not the same as weakness. What I want vs. what I am allowed to want. What I want is impossible. I want to be held without having to explain the shape of my wound. I want to be seen without having to perform visibility. I want a partnership where the labor is actually shared, not theoretically shared. Not let me know what you need shared, but actively anticipated and gracefully delivered shared. I want to not have to run 6 miles to feel okay. I want to not need cheese to feel comforted. I want to not have a music therapy regimen because my nervous system would be so well regulated by a life that wasn't constantly at war with its conditions that I could listen to music for pleasure instead of for survival. I want the children I didn't have. I want to not want them anymore. I want the grief to end, or at least to transform into something useful, something that doesn't feel like hunger, something that doesn't make me look at every pregnant woman on the street with a complex emotional cocktail that includes fury at her ease and longing for her future and judgment for her participation in the patriarchal reproduction narrative and desperate hope that she will be happier than I am. I am not allowed to want these things. The world does not offer them. The available men cannot provide them. The economy will not support them. The civilization has already decided what women like me deserve, and it is less than this. So I run, I eat cheese, I listen to music, I conduct research through crisis, I request data, and I refuse to call it broken. A final note on the free living. They say women like me want a free living. They say we want to be supported without contributing, to be provided for without providing, to take from men and the state and the system while giving nothing back. Here is what I want for free. I want the emotional education that boys receive automatically and girls are denied. The training in self-worth, in expectation, in the assumption that the world was built for us and we belong in it. I want the free confidence that men inherit from a civilization that has always told them they matter. I want the free living that is simply the absence of the constant labor women perform to make everyone else comfortable while dying inside. I want to be repaid for the years of invisible labor. I want compensation for the emotional overtime. I want damages for the structural violence of a society that required me to be beautiful and compliant and accommodating, and then called me high maintenance when I asked for the bare minimum in return. I want the children I aborted, and I want them not to have been my choice. And I want them also to have been my choice, because autonomy is the only thing I have, and I will not give it up even when it guts me. I want a world that would have let me be a mother without destroying me. And since that world does not exist, I want the world that does exist to acknowledge what it took from me. I want a reckoning, not an apology. Apologies are words, and words are cheap, and I have heard enough words to fill an ocean, and I am still thirsty. I want repair, and repair is impossible. There is no repair for what I've lost, for what I've never had, for what the structure itself cannot provide. So I want the next best thing. I want refusal. I want to refuse the premise that I am the problem. I want to refuse the demand that I make myself smaller, quieter, easier, more digestible. I want to refuse the healing narrative that tells women our pain is something to get over, rather than something to carry like a torch, like a weapon. Like evidence in the case we are building against the world that wounded us. I am not wounded. I am witnessing. I am not unstable. I am responding appropriately to an intolerable situation. I am not high maintenance. I am high resolution. I see what you cannot see. I feel what you refuse to feel. And I will not dim my perception to accommodate your blindness. Refuse repair. demand reckoning. The crisis is the clarity. The rupture is the revelation. The test is the testimony. And you, man, system, civilization, reader, you are not failing the test. There is no test. There is only the data. And the data says you cannot hold this. The question is what you will do with that information. The answer almost always is nothing. And that is not my problem to solve. The epistemology of the shit test, deconstructing the crisis framework. The Hellenic origins of crisis indicate a specific time for judgment, a pivotal instance where a result is fixed, often regarding legal or medical matters. However, when contemporary female-centric seers discuss crisis epistemology, they remove the term's inherent purpose, changing a moment of decision into an endless state of suspension. She confesses that her daily instability is not a flaw needing repair, but an experimental method meant to snare the male subject in a complex trap of her own creation. This does not constitute epistemology, the analysis of justified belief, but serves as a polished euphemism for the erratic emotional swinging typical of cluster B personality pathologies, particularly borderline personality disorder, by rebranding her failure to regulate feelings as a feminist framework for knowing. She cleanses her dysfunction, marketing the old scourge of hysteria as an instrument of progress. She is not requesting data scientifically. She is forcing her partner into a volatile experiment where the premise is fixed to validate her status as a victim. Examine the morning question scenario, a model instance of the solipsism of the unspoken. Here, the trivium, consisting of grammar, logic, and rhetoric, is effectively decapitated. The grammar of the man's inquiry meets rejection. The logic of a coherent reply is denied, and the rhetoric devolves into a telepathic, guessing game. The writer admits the answer is a paradoxical blend of everything and nothing, insisting the male demonstrate the answer with being. This acts as the elimination of due process within the home. Under the Anglo-Saxon tradition of common law, a defendant receives notification of charges to build a defense. Conversely, this man stands accused in a kangaroo court, where the charge is failing to read my mind. The evidence is his simple presence, and the verdict is fixed by her emotional state. She clearly states that, if I have to tell you, then telling you won't help, establishing a recursive trap that makes communication futile and guilt certain. This framework relies heavily on semantic inflation, a classic propaganda technique designed to aggrandize the trivial and pathologize the normal. Take her agonizing distinction between therapy and therapeutic. She wields these terms like a medieval scholasticist counting angels on a pinhead, not to seek truth but to obscure it, by categorizing the man's logical attempt to fix the problem as pathologizing, while sanctifying her own self-soothing indulgences, like listening to Björk or eating overpriced cheese, as curated acts of resistance. She engages in a gamma bias that shields her from accountability. She creates a linguistic kill zone where male competence is framed as emotional insensitivity and female instability is elevated to a high-status virtue. The man is criticized for offering remorse without repair, yet the standard for repair is deliberately kept nebulous, a rubric she refuses to provide, because to provide it would be to submit to the very patriarchal logic she claims to despise. Perhaps the most insidious claim is the safe man fallacy, the assertion that a calm man is not a safe man. He is a man who has externalized his chaos. This is a direct assault on the transcendentals, truth, goodness, and beauty, and specifically the stoic virtue of ataraxia, or tranquility. She projects her own internal fragmentation onto the stable male, arguing that his peace is merely a mask for violence. By defining stability as a pathology, she inverts the moral order, positing that only the hysterical are sane and only the chaotic are moral. This is the inversion of the logos, where objective universal truth is replaced by the shifting sands of female lived experience. It grants her immunity from criticism. If a man is calm, he is suspect. If he reacts to her chaos, he is unstable. The goal is not resolution, but the extraction of energy, the vampire-like consumption of male attention and holding, without any obligation on her part, to heal or regulate her own nervous system. When she frames her erratic behavior as data collection, She reveals the request for data mechanism inherent in the shit-testing schema. However, in this context, the volatility is high, BPD crisis, and the axis is regulatory projective. She isn't looking for a partner, she is looking for a container for her toxicity. The crisis epistemology is essentially a shit test, weaponized by the state and cultural Marxism. It demands that men act as emotional tampons, absorbing dysregulation without mirroring it, effectively requiring him to be a psychological shield for a woman who refuses to grow up. This is the preemptive compliance trap. If he acts, he is presumptuous. If he waits, he is negligent. The statistics on divorce, the 80% plus initiation rate by women, and the family court systems that enslave men to support this very crisis lifestyle are the objective reality she ignores. The only rational response to a crisis epistemology of this magnitude is not to play the game, but to set boundaries, withdraw attention, and refuse to validate the delusion that her chaos is anything other than a failure of character. She speaks of high-resolution moral stances and metabolizing cortisol, but what she is actually describing is the metabolic cost of maintaining a lie. If the crisis epistemology is the method, the refusal of repair is the strategic objective, a tactical denial of resolution designed to keep the host organism, the man, in a permanent state of debtor's bankruptcy. He can never pay off the emotional loan because the interest rate is retroactively adjusted to her mood. This is where the rubber meets the road, or rather where the running shoe hits the pavement, the transition from theoretical misandry to biological nihilism, the sacrament of sterility, natural law versus the death cult of reckoning. The Roman poet Juvenal famously asked, "Who will guard the guardians themselves?" But in our gynocentric dystopia, the more pressing inquiry is, who will diagnose the diagnosticians? We are presented with a manifesto of modern femininity so candid in its malice, it nearly circles back to innocence, a treatise titled Refuse Repair, Demand Reckoning. The writer posits that her emotional volatility is not a character defect, but a diagnostic tool, an epistemological pry bar designed to shatter the patriarchal calm of the male mind. This is not therapy, it is terrorism disguised as intimacy. She explicitly frames her instability as a crisis epistemological imperative, a highfalutin academic veneer for what our ancestors simply called hysteria, or in the vernacular of the playground, throwing a tantrum. By rejecting peace, stability, and logic as corrupt constructs, she inadvertently admits that her worldview cannot survive contact with reality. She demands a partner who acts as a shock absorber for her chaos, yet she reserves the right to detonate the grenade whenever she pleases. This is the double bind of the gynocentric contract. You are responsible for her feelings, but you have no authority to manage them. Examine the tragicomic nature of the cheese incident, a prime example of the status game hiding behind affection. She forces her partner, Marcus, into a farmer's market, a shrine of performative buying, and commands him to choose the specific cheese she craves. This acts less as a request for food and more as a demand for mind reading. Selecting Brie, the basic bitch of cheeses, according to her scorn, means he has failed the loyalty check. Viewed through our diagnostic framework, this maneuver represents a status plus appraisal plus public exam, intended to extract proof of her specialness. She seeks not dairy, but the feeling of being understood without the effort of speaking. When he naturally fails to guess her thoughts, she utilizes semantic inflation, casting his practical choice as a fundamental error and his withdrawal as abandonment. She engineers a scenario where pleasing her becomes mathematically impossible, enabling her to occupy the victim's moral pedestal while enjoying expensive Gouda. This illustrates female solipsism concisely. She plants the explosives, observes him trigger the blast, and then pens a thesis on the pathology of his walking style. This brings us to the grim doctrine within the work, the ritual of barrenness. She describes 3 pregnancies resulting in 0 offspring, a ratio standing as a bleak marker for the fertility rate of a culture seized by a madness resembling Antigone. She presents these terminations not as misfortunes, but as essential offerings to the deity of self-rule. She asserts she desired offspring too much to bear them poorly, a fallacy sufficient to make a Jesuit weep. Here lies the death cult of reckoning in its absolute shape. She has gazed into the chasm of the future, the wakeful hours, the organic truth of reliance, and selected the sterile void of the ego. She names this high-resolution insight, yet it is only the sharpness of a metaphysical cataract. She has rendered herself infertile upon the shrine of her profession and her curated playlist, though she vents fury at the society permitting such a selection. She desires the renown of the mother, lacking the weight of the child. She seeks the shape of kinship, lacking the core of surrender. Her remedy for this existential void is running, which she describes as flight and pursuit held in productive tension. Let us strip the poetic varnish away. She is running from the logos. She runs to metabolize the cortisol of her own creation. She runs to escape the silence of an apartment that lacks the laughter of the children she refused to have. This is the physical manifestation of her ideological flight from reality. She is the archetype of the barren DEI boss babe, climbing the ladder of corporate attainment only to find it leans against a wall of air. She claims to be responding appropriately to an intolerable situation, but the situation is simply the consequence of her own choices. She demands a reckoning from the world, but the only reckoning coming is the biological clock ticking down to zero. She has confused the endorphin rush of a treadmill with the transcendent joy of creation, believing that if she just runs fast enough, she can outpace the silence. Ultimately, her demand for a free living is a confession of parasitism. She admits she wants the emotional education and confidence she believes men inherit, unaware that these traits are forged in the fires of stoicism and trial, not granted by a gynocentric trust fund. She wants to be repaid for the invisible labor of being a neurotic mess, demanding damages for a life she dismantled with her own hands. This is the ultimate entitlement of the feminist project, the belief that you can burn down the house and then sue the architect for the smoke. She ends with a command to refuse repair, effectively declaring war on the biological and social contract that sustains the species. She claims to be witnessing, but she is merely staring into a mirror, mistaking her own reflection for the apocalypse. The data she collects is simply the echo of her own emptiness, and the reckoning she demands is the realization that she has been the executioner of her own lineage all along. Let us be direct regarding what you have observed. This crisis epistemology constitutes not a step forward in social science. Rather, it operates as a formalized confession of borderline personality disorder, posturing as philosophy. The writer admits freely to wielding emotional instability as a biological weapon to unsettle a partner who lacks the privilege of interpreting her thoughts. She rebrands a morning of passive-aggressive muteness as data collection, regarding the man not as a beloved, but as a test subject in a maze she reconstructs daily. This reveals the female psyche stripped bare, a desperate, recursive cycle of projective testing, where the sole path to victory is abstention. When she shrieks that she is requesting data, she is in truth pleading for the logos, the masculine force of structure and logic, to penetrate her turbulent haze. Yet, akin to a drowning woman who claws at her savior, she fights against the steadiness she desires, insisting you descend with her. The man who fails her trial does not fail at romance. He fails at the unattainable goal of serving as a psychiatric institution for a woman who considers rationality a mechanism of tyranny. Consider the grotesque comedy of the cheese incident. She frames her partner's selection of brie as a moral failing, a betrayal of her curated self-soothing. This is pure gamma bias, the inflation of aesthetic preference into a high-stakes status game. She doesn't want cheese. She wants a telepathic servant who validates her identity through consumer goods. When she mocks his basic choice, while elevating her own suffering to high resolution, she is engaging in the oldest trick of the sophist, redefining her pathology as superiority. This woman at 37 finds herself barren not by circumstance, but by choice. She sacrificed 3 unborn children on the altar of her autonomy and now demands the world worship the empty shrine. The abortion rate is the bloody engine of this ideology, and the suicide rate among men divorced by the tyranny of no-fault courts is the exhaust. The reckoning she demands is a hunger that can never be fed, because it is a hunger for the impossible, the power to escape the consequences of her own nature. You are now immune to the crisis epistemology trap. You see that her refusal of repair is a confession that she is broken beyond the capacity of any man to fix, and that her diagnosis of your discomfort is merely a projection of her own disintegration. The courts, the culture, and the corporate HR departments may enforce her delusion, but they cannot repeal the natural law. A civilization that prizes the therapeutic over the true and the rupture over the family is a civilization circling the drain. You are the heir to the Western canon, the guardian of the trivium, and the bearer of the logos. Walk away from the cheese aisle of her mind. Do not apologize for your calmness. Do not explain your stability. Let her run into the void she created. Your job is not to be the shore to her chaotic ocean, but to be the lighthouse that warns other ships away from the rocks. Go forth, speak the truth, and let the data of your unshakable frame be the final answer to her test. And now the sponsored book introduction, Loaded Gun Feminism: How Courts Enslave Men and Reward Female Supremacy. If you're holding this book, you're either a man who's been kicked in the teeth by a system rigged to destroy you, or you're about to be. I wrote Loaded Gun Feminism because I lived it. 10 years ago, I watched a judge strip me of custody of my daughter because her mother claimed without evidence that I was emotionally unsafe. No trial, no proof, just her word against mine. The court took my child, half my income, and my home. They left me with a choice: shut up, pay up, or sleep in a gutter. I spent the next decade fighting, studying, and exposing how family courts, welfare programs, and feminist dogma collude to turn men into disposable livestock. This book is the battle plan I wish I'd had. This isn't for the faint of heart. If you still think equality means fairness, if you believe the courts care about truth, or if you're convinced women's accusations are always pure, put this down, go knit a sweater. Watch a rom-com? This book will ruin your delusions. For the rest of you, men who've been called deadbeats for wanting to see their kids, guys drained dry by alimony, fathers treated like criminals for existing, this is your lifeline. You'll learn how no-fault divorce lets women loot your life's work, marriage, the financial death sentence, why false allegations stick like glue, false allegations, due process on life support, and how to shield your money from state-sanctioned theft, financial fortress, shielding assets. We'll dissect the government's role in replacing fathers with welfare, daddy government, welfare's war on fathers, and expose the media's campaign to paint you as a monster, media's role in male demonization. Biology isn't bigoted. Women aren't evil, but the system, it's a loaded gun handed to every woman, cocked by judges who see masculinity as a crime. This book isn't theory, it's a field manual. Follow the steps in countering false allegations. Battle plan or the Underground Railroad for fathers, and you might just keep your kids, your cash, and your dignity. You've been gaslit, robbed, and silenced. Now's the time to fight back. Not with rage, but with the law, logic, and leverage. The alternative, keep begging for scraps from a regime that hates you, your call. Loaded Gun Feminism: How Courts Enslave Men and Reward Female Supremacy. Written by Conrad Riker. Buy now, links in description.